everyone, and welcome back to the Wisdom by Harry YouTube channel. My name is Harry.
And I'm Mary. We're so excited to have you here today for another fascinating episode. Okay, so just when you think things might have found some kind of rhythm in the Ukraine conflict, the whole narrative seems to take a pretty sharp turn.
It really does. We've seen this massive escalation on the ground, attacks, but also, maybe more surprisingly, some really strong words from, well, a very familiar international figure.
Right, and that's what we're diving into today, this recent escalation, specifically a huge aerial attack, and then this quite startling reaction from former President Trump and how Russia responded to that.
Exactly. We've been looking at reports from various international news sources to try and, piece together what's actually going on, what these different events might mean.
So the mission really is to understand the significance here, the attack, the words, the reactions, without getting totally lost in every single detail.
Yeah, get a clear picture of the main currents.
Okay, so let's start with the attack itself. The scale sounds immense.
Oh, it was. Reports mention over 350 drones, plus several missiles, launched by Russia against Ukraine, basically overnight.
350, wow.
Yeah. And news outlets described it as possibly the largest drone attack since the full-scale invasion started. And definitely one of the biggest aerial assaults overall.
That sheer number, it suggests something, doesn't it? Like maybe a deliberate attempt to just overwhelm defenses.
That's certainly one interpretation. Overwhelm defenses, hit infrastructure hard, maybe send a particular message. It also, raises questions about Russia's drone production or acquisition capabilities right now.
And the impact. It wasn't just drones flying around. There was real damage, casualties.
Tragically, yes. Strikes hit Kiev, other cities too. Reports mention civilian casualties, even children in the Zhytomyr region. The numbers were still coming in, but initial reports were saying at least 12 or 13 killed, dozens injured.
Grim figures. And Ukraine's response to the attack itself, they claimed some success in shooting them down.
They did. Ukraine reported downing a, quote, significant number of both the drones and the missiles, which, if accurate, says something positive about their air defense capabilities.
But also highlights the sheer volume they were up against.
Exactly. Even intercepting a lot means a lot got launched.
Okay, so that's the military escalation. Now, the political side got really interesting with comments from former President Trump, unexpectedly strong criticism of Putin.
Yeah, that definitely caught people's attention, given, the narrative has often been about their previously reported sort of good relationship.
Yeah, so what did he actually say?
Well, the reports quote him directly calling Putin's actions absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
That was in all caps in some reports.
Oh, absolute crazy, okay.
And he specifically mentioned the loss of life, saying Putin was, quote, needlessly killing a lot of people. He also asserted that Putin wants, again quoting, all of Ukraine.
Not just parts of it, but the whole country.
That was his assertion, yeah. And he added a pretty stark warning, suggesting this path could lead to the downfall of Russia.
That's quite a prediction. Now, we should probably add, this isn't the very first time he's criticized Putin, is it?
No, that's a fair context.
Yeah.
There have been instances before, and times when he's threatened things like tariffs or sanctions during his presidency.
But the language here, absolutely crazy, downfall of Russia, it does feel like maybe a shift in intensity.
It certainly seems that way. The tone feels different, more pointed perhaps, which makes the Kremlin's reaction even more noteworthy.
Right. How did Moscow respond to being called absolutely crazy by Trump?
Well, their response, voiced by spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, was, well, polite is one word used in reports, almost dismissive.
Polite dismissal. How does that work?
Peskov apparently attributed the whole situation, including Trump's comments, to an emotional overload of everyone involved.
Emotional overload. So basically brushing it off as everyone just being a bit stressed and overwrought.
Kinda, yeah. It's a way to downplay the criticism without directly confronting Trump, you see. It frames it as heat-of-the-moment rhetoric rather than a fundamental policy shift or a serious critique to be addressed head-on.
That's interesting. Almost like they don't want to burn that bridge. Or maybe they see some advantage in letting him talk while they carry on.
It could be strategic. They also reportedly expressed gratitude for U.S. efforts in organizing peace talks, and specifically thanked Trump personally for his role in that.
So criticize his emotional overload, but thank him for peace efforts. It sounds like they're trying to sort of manage him.
It could be interpreted that way, keeping lines open, perhaps trying to influence future possibilities, or maybe just muddying the waters.
Okay, so while Trump is calling Putin crazy, how is Ukraine's leadership reacting, especially after that massive attack?
Well, President Zelensky, understandably, condemned the attacks very strongly. He talked about Russia acting with impunity and made a call for real pressure to be brought against Moscow.
And did he mention the U.S. or Trump in that?
He did. He specifically called for more sanctions, and reports mentioned him expressing disappointment with what he termed the silence of America. So clearly looking for more vocal and material support from the U.S.
Which is interesting because Trump, in his comments, also apparently criticized Zelensky's communication style, saying he was, quote, doing his country no favors by talking the way he does.
Right, so you have this complex dynamic, Trump criticizing Putin, but also Zelensky, while Zelensky is calling for more pressure and specifically mentioning the U.S.
It really highlights the different perspectives and maybe competing agendas here. What about other international players? How did they react?
Well, French President Macron weighed in. He suggested that maybe Trump now realizes that Putin has lied about Ukraine.
So Macron is interpreting Trump's comments as a sign of realization.
Yeah, and Macron expressed hope that this realization would, quote, translate into action. So seeing it potentially as more than just words.
Interesting. What about Germany?
Germany condemned the attacks, calling them an affront to Trump's own peace efforts, interestingly enough.
An affront to Trump's efforts. Okay.
Yeah, and they also called for more EU sanctions against Russia.
And are those sanctions happening?
It seems so. Reports indicate the EU is working on a new package. So the pressure continues on that front.
But actual de-escalation, like a ceasefire, that still seems tricky.
Very much so. There was talk mentioned in reports about Ukraine agreeing to a 30-day ceasefire.
Okay.
But Russia apparently only proposed working on a memorandum. And, a memorandum isn't the same as a ceasefire.
Right. A memorandum sounds much less concrete, more like an agreement to agree on something later.
Exactly. It outlines understanding, potential steps, but it doesn't usually mean an immediate stop to fighting like a formal ceasefire agreement would imply. So, still a gap there.
Okay. We did see a prisoner swap recently, though.
Yes, there was a prisoner exchange reported. That's always a positive sign on a humanitarian level, even if it doesn't solve the core conflict.
And just adding more complexity, Ukraine's intelligence chief accused China of supplying equipment to Russia's military.
That accusation was reported, yes, which, if true, obviously adds another significant layer to the whole geopolitical picture.
And tensions elsewhere too, Finland summoning the Russian ambassador?
Yes, over suspected airspace violations. So, the broader tensions around Russia remain high.
Now, going back to the massive attack, did Russia offer any justification for why they launched so many drones and missiles?
They did frame it. The Kremlin stated that these assaults were a response strike.
A response to what?
To Ukrainian attacks on Russian infrastructure. That was their stated reason retaliation.
Okay, so framing it as tit for tat, it's important to hear their stated rationale, even as we see the devastation it caused.
Absolutely. Understanding their public justification is part of the picture.
And just to step back for a second, while Trump's comments feel like a big moment, some observers would say Putin's actions aren't really new, right? That this fits a longer pattern.
That's a crucial perspective. Many analysts argue that Putin's aggression towards Ukraine and the denial of its sovereignty isn't a sudden development, but has been a consistent theme for many years, even decades.
So this isn't necessarily a sudden change of heart from Putin, but maybe a continuation or an escalation of a long-held stance.
Exactly. This historical context helps frame these recent events that are happening within a much longer, deeper conflict.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. We've got a really significant military escalation with this huge aerial attack.
Right. Then you have this very strong, somewhat unexpected condemnation of Putin from former President Trump.
Followed by a very carefully worded, maybe strategically dismissive response from the Kremlin, the emotional overload line.
Yeah. And alongside all that, continued calls from Ukraine and allies like Germany and France for more pressure, more sanctions, more action.
It feels like a moment of, heightened tension, but also maybe heightened confusion or unpredictability.
I think that's fair. It's a critical point. You have this intense military action coinciding with some pretty sharp rhetoric from unexpected places.
So the big question hanging over all this for you listening is, what does it all mean for actually stopping the fighting? For finding some kind of resolution?
Exactly. Does this emotional overload, as Peskov put it, combined with Trump's outburst and the massive attack, does it signal a path towards de-escalation somehow, or does it actually make things more volatile and dangerous?
What does this particular moment truly signify for where this conflict might be heading next?
It's definitely something to keep thinking about, keep watching closely, and try to understand all the different angles at play here.
Absolutely. A complex situation just got even more complex, it seems. We encourage you to keep exploring it.